I am finally going to address the results of this poll. And we had 160 people weighing on this. I wanted to know if you can set up and fix native HDR gaming with your LG OLED after watching my videos. And I'm very happy to see that the majority of you said yes, it is clear and easy for me to set up HDR. So 39% of you said no problem, man. And I feel proud about it, man. I feel happy about it because I was in the same situation. I didn't know. And when I got this LG OLED, I was so frustrated. You open the games, it's just a mess. Okay, and it's just inexplicable that you spent so much money and this thing just doesn't work out of the box. So if I can contribute just a little bit, I'm very, very satisfied, very happy with that. So also we had, I am not sure how to identify black level rays, and 16% of you selected that option. We also have, I am not sure when to use HGIG tone mapping off or dynamic tone mapping, and 34% of you selected that option. So we're definitely gonna talk about that. And the last option was, I think SDR is better than HDR, and I was expecting zero. Nobody saying that, but we're gonna talk about that too. Okay, so 11% of you selected that HDR is better than HDR. Well, of course, if you don't have to fix anything, you open it, yeah, you can say it's better because of that. But of course, I am referring to picture quality. Okay, which one looks better? Of course, if you open native HDR and it's just a mess, yeah, SDR is better. Okay, but when HDR works, no way. But we're gonna talk about that. So let me start by addressing when to use HGIG, dynamic tone mapping, or tone mapping off. So on this LG OLED, we have this option called HGIG. So what HGIG means is no tone mapping on the TV. So what is that? Well, no tone mapping, what does that mean? Okay, well, the TV has a maximum peak brightness capability. Okay, so in case of this LG C1 is up to 800 nits. Okay, so if the TV is up to 800 nits and the content is trying to output up to 800 nits, then the TV can display that content accurately, okay, without any issues, no problem. So that is the option that you always want to use, but that option is not always possible. So when is HGIG possible? When you have sliders on the game. So if the game has a maximum peak brightness slider that you can reduce or increase to the maximum capabilities of your TV, you want to use HGIG. Also, sometimes the game doesn't have sliders, but it supports the system level calibration. So then on your console or in Windows 11, we have the HDR calibration app. You are going to select that maximum peak brightness to be the maximum peak brightness of your TV, which is, if it's a G1 or C1, it's gonna be 800 nits. If it's a G2, it's gonna be 1000 nits. Okay, so you always want to use HGIG because HGIG is going to give you the most accurate picture. Now, it can happen that when you reduce the maximum peak brightness of the game, or when you adjust that maximum peak brightness slider on the game, actually it is not working properly. Okay, so that, for example, we have games where you select 800 and the game is trying to output up to 600. Okay, or sometimes it is trying to output more because the game also has like a mid-tones slider that is affecting that maximum peak brightness, or the slider on the game is just broken. Okay, that can happen. Okay, and when that happens, you need to know what's going on. So you would need to analyze, a picture of the game on HDR and open that on a PC with the HDR. It is called WCG Image Viewer app, HDR WCG image viewer app. So you open that with that app to know the max CLL, to know what the game is trying to output, okay? But that happens, okay? But that is unlikely. Most of the time the in-game slider is gonna work, okay? Most of the time I'm talking about more than 50% of the time, okay? So that can happen. So if the in-game slider is broken or the HDR is broken, then it's broken, man. What are we gonna do? And it can also happen that when you reduce the in-game maximum brightness slider, the mid-tones become a little bit darker. That can happen, okay? It is very, very, very rare, but it can also happen because when you adjust the in-game slider, the game is doing tone mapping, okay? So the game was graded to be 2000 nits or 1500 or 1000. So if you reduce that, then the game needs to do that tone mapping, okay? So the TV doesn't have to. So that should work well, but sometimes it doesn't, okay? But that's the ideal option. The game is awesome, the game doesn't have any issues, the game doesn't have black level rays, the in-game slider works, or it supports the system level calibration. You use HGIG on your LG OLED and it just looks fantastic, no problem. That's the best option. So now, dynamic tone mapping is something that a lot of people like, even when the game doesn't have any issues and the game is fantastic. Why? Because when you switch back and forth from HGIG to dynamic tone mapping looks brighter most of the time. So we humans, when we see more brightness, we like it more. It's that simple. But do not get confused with that. Do not go with that, because you're not going with the best option. Because what happens with dynamic tone mapping is that on this LGC1 at least, because it's gonna be different, dynamic tone mapping is different, slightly different on the C2, G2, and it's going to be different on the C3, G3, and it's gonna keep being different because dynamic tone mapping is gonna change. So it is like a algorithm that the TV is analyzing scene by scene and determining, okay, are we gonna push more brightness or not? So it is not gonna be exactly the same for every single TV, but it is not going to be accurate, okay? And most likely dynamic tone mapping is going to look brighter. When things are supposed to be dark, dynamic tone mapping is just gonna make everything brighter. So you're on a cave, you're on a dark scene, on a horror game or something, and dynamic tone mapping is going to make things too bright, okay? Too bright everywhere. And I'm not talking about peak brightness, I'm talking about visibility near black. That's why I do not like dynamic tone mapping. But if you like it, the option is there, use it. So now, if you are going to use dynamic tone mapping or tone mapping off, so let's talk about that, tone mapping off. You need to know, so the ideal thing is to know what is the max CLL of the game, okay? So what is the game trying to output? So let's say the game doesn't have sliders, the game doesn't support the system level calibration. You just open the game and it has an HDR on and off. You're like, man, what is this? Okay, what is the game trying to do? So you need to know what the game is trying to do. What is the max CLL of the game? So how can you know that? You need to take a screenshot if you have a PC and open that screenshot with the HDR WCG image viewer app, so you can know the max CLL of the game. And if you have a console, then you would need to do a video capture with an external capture card, and then open that recording on a PC with a player, with a VCL player, for example, and then you take a screenshot of that recording and you open that screenshot with the HDR WCG image viewer app to know the max CLL of the game. Or you just watch a video of somebody who is gonna tell you what is the max CLL of the game. Okay, if the game doesn't have sliders and it doesn't support the system level calibration. So let's say that the game maximum peak brightness, the max CLL is 4000. Okay, let's say that's the case. Well, if it's 4000 nits, you can use tone mapping off or dynamic tone mapping, and it's going to be perfect. Okay, and if that's the case, my recommendation would be tone mapping off, okay? And that is going to look, that tone mapping off option is going to look very close to HGIG. And the only difference is going to be that HGIG, let's say that the same game has a slider and you can reduce that brightness to 800, you use HGIG, that versus tone mapping off with the game trying to output 4000 nits. The difference is going to be that with HGIG, all the highlights are going to try to output the maximum peak brightness of the TV. So everything is going to look, is going to pop more. So the HDR is going to have more HDR impact, more effect, okay? But with tone mapping off, if the game is trying to output 4000 nits by default, it's going to look very good. And you will get the maximum peak brightness of the TV. So what tone mapping is, basically, the TV detects, okay, the game, this content is trying to output more brightness than what I can do. So then we need to do this tone mapping, so when the game or the content is trying to output this much brightness, what we are going to output is 800, because that's what we can do, or 1000 if you have a G2, because that's what we can do. So that's tone mapping. It's like adapting, it's like compressing those highlights so the TV can show you the detail within its capabilities, okay? And the same goes if the content is doing less than the capabilities of the TV. So let's say the content has, for some reason, it has a maximum peak brightness of 400. If we have this crappy HDR content that is like 400 nits or something like that, then the TV, what the TV can do is say, okay, well, this is 400 nits, we can do 800, so let's just make this 400 be 800. So the TV is still gonna give you the maximum peak brightness. So that tone mapping works in both ways. If the content is graded to be higher brightness than what the TV can give you, or the opposite, if the content is less than what the TV can give you. So now, if that's the case, if the content has a different maximum peak brightness, so if the content has a max CLL that is not 4000, that let's say it is 1000, 2000, 10,000 nits or less, 400, 500, 700, then we do have the option in this LG OLED with a secret menu. We have the option to select the correct tone mapping, and this, it is not necessary if you are using the internal apps on the TV. So if you are using the internal apps on the TV, this is not necessary, because the TV is going to auto detect what is the max CLL of the content. So you just select tone mapping off and it's gonna be doing the correct tone mapping. But if you're using a PC or a console, this doesn't happen automatically. So what you can do is you come here, step on select mode 1113 111. Hopefully this option is still on the G3 because they are, and C3 because they are locking so many settings and trying to change everything. Hopefully this still's there. So here we have the option to select this mastering peak and max CLL. So let's say that the gain is 10,000 nits. We go ahead and we say this. Okay, 10,000 nits. We're gonna change this to 10,000 and this to 10,000. Okay. Or let's say the game is 1000 and we want to use tone mapping off, is the best option. Or even with dynamic tone mapping, this works too. So then you select, okay, it's 1000, we're gonna select 1000 here and 1000 here. Okay, that's it. It's that simple. You always want to use HGIG unless there is something terribly wrong with the game or the game doesn't support the system level calibration and the game doesn't have sliders, okay? If that's the case, then you need to figure it out. You need to know what is the max CLL of the content of the game. Is it 2000? Is it 4000? And once you learn that, then you come here to this menu and you adjust this max CLL and this mastering peak accordingly. Okay? You change it to exactly what the content is, or as close as possible. So let's say that the content is doing 500. Okay, the max CLL of the content is 500. Then the closest we have here is 540. Okay, you select 540, and what's gonna happen is that the TV is going to push the maximum peak, its maximum peak brightness. So regardless if it's a G2, C1, CX, whatever it is, you select this and the TV is going to do tone mapping to give you its maximum peak brightness based on that max CLL. Okay, so that is it. That's when to use HGIG tone mapping off or dynamic tone mapping. So now I am not sure how to identify black level rays. Let me see if this works. I am going to change the recording. I'm going to change the recording here so it is washed out. So I'm basically going to intentionally wash out the recording. Let me see if I can change this. I'm having some issue with the mouse, so I have to buy a new mouse now. Let's see if I can make this work. Okay, so I'm going to change this. So I'm going to shrink this. So my face should look washed out. Boom. You see how that looks? It should look washed out, because what I am doing is basically I am trying to simulate the problem that we have with the games. So the games look like this. If this is actually working. If it's not, I will explain in the comments. But I hope this works. That my face look washed out. So now what we have to do, if the game has the black level rays, we just need to lower it and boom, it should be fixed. Okay, let me go back. It didn't work. Okay. Man, okay. No, it didn't work. Man, I have to definitely buy a new mouse. This is not working. This is a pain. Okay, boom. You see? You see that difference between washed out and fixed? That's what we have to fix on the games. The vast majority of the games have this issue. So how can we go from that washed out picture to fix? How can we fix that? Well, very easy. We come here to Game Optimizer and we lower fine tune dark areas. So we're gonna use this setting here, fine tune dark areas, which is grayed out because I'm not using VRR. So you have to use VRR. You have to use G-Sync or FreeSync. And then you're going to lower this fine tune dark areas to -16. Okay? That's how you fix. That's how you go from that washed out picture to fix. So if you see that the games near black look like gray, it doesn't look good. It looks too visible. The visibility is too much. It's a horror game. It's supposed to be dark, like, you know, Callisto Protocol. And then it just looks bad. You have to lower the black level using these fine-tune dark areas -16. If your LG OLED doesn't have this option, because it's like, I think a C9 might not have that option, or you're not using VRR for some reason, then you can use black level or this screen brightness option. And look, I am on SDR right now. I was using black from insertion. That's why you see these settings here. And then you have to use this option here, screen brightness, and lower that to 46. So that screen brightness or black level on the C2 on 46 is the same as forcing limited, basically. So what you're doing is you're expanding that black level. Okay? So you fix that washed out picture. Okay? It is better to use the fine-tune dark areas instead of this option, because the fine-tune dark areas option is going to affect more. It's going to affect less the midtones. So it's going to fix the near black, but it's not going to make the midtones darker, that much darker. Okay? So it is better to use the fine-tune dark areas. So that's how to identify the black level rays. So you open the game, assume that the game has the black level rays, lower that screen brightness to 46 or fine-tune dark areas -16, and unless you see that everything looks crushed, like near black is just crushed, like big time. Unless you see that, that's probably the way to go. Because most games, unfortunately, have this issue. So assume, when you open the game, assume that the game has the black level raised, lower fine-tune dark areas -16, and see how that looks. If it's not too washed, if it's not crushing the blacks everywhere, that's probably the way to go. But if you see that the blacks are crushed, then awesome, the game doesn't have the black level raised, just leave it at default. So now, to finish the video, I think SDR is better than HDR. Okay, well, SDR is better because it always works. You know, I haven't seen a lot of SDR games that look washed out. To my mind comes Genshin Impact. That game is washed out on SDR and it looks terrible if you don't lower the black level. But it is very strange, very unusual to see that behavior. So SDR works. You don't need to tweak any settings, but I mean, you can always, you know, tweak the settings to get a better result. But the picture quality on HDR is so much better because you have a wider color gamut with more brightness. So you have more color, more brightness, and you have more detail in bright areas. So let's say, you know, Hogwarts Legacy. The game starts inside a cave and you can see the outside of the cave. You can see it is very bright. But you can see that there is an ocean, there is water outside the cave, and that detail is visible in the brightness. So it is very bright, but you can still see detail on the brightness. Or you are playing Cyberpunk and you are inside a tunnel and you look to the outside and it's very bright, but you can still see the cars, you can still see the detail. If you are on SDR, that detail is not there. It is not visible. So HDR has more detail. It looks better because it looks brighter on things that are supposed to be bright. So it looks more lifelike. Okay, the bright objects popping looks more realistic. So you see light sources like the sun, the moon, just lights on the street. You see them being brighter, okay? So that looks better. And it is more colorful, brighter. It is definitely a better looking picture. It has more information. It's 10 bits, okay? Or more in the future. So it is a better looking picture. There's no question about that. The thing is, HDR doesn't, we have a mess. Like these developers, they are not working on HDR a lot of the time. They just don't work on it. They don't care. I don't know why that, you know, when are we going to get this situation fixed? But HDR is just a much, much better picture. So now, SDR is useful, for example, to use OLED Motion Pro, black frame insertion. With SDR, you can push all the brightness that the TV can give you, all the full screen brightness power that the TV has, and get like 400 nits full screen. And you need that for black frame insertion because black frame insertion is going to make everything darker, okay? So in that case, SDR is better than HDR because HDR is gonna be like 140, 150 nits on this LG C1. So as that might not be bright enough for OLED Motion Pro. It is. If you tweak the settings, it is bright enough. And I've been using it like that most of the time. But SDR can be beneficial for something like that, but it is a challenge because on SDR, if you try to push 400 nits, the colors are gonna be washed out, and then you have to, you know, use native color gamut, and so you lose the color accuracy. So SDR is not designed to push more than 200 nits. Okay, it's 100 or 200 nits, no more than that. And when you try to push more brightness, which is what people want. People want to have 400 nits full screen to watch hockey. I don't know why. Maybe because they are on a bright room. So if you are on a bright room, you don't care about picture quality. Picture quality is on a dark room, completely dark room, okay? So even a room like this, that's not how I watch the TV. So yeah, no way. after you see how HDR looks like when it actually works and it is not broken, there's no way you can say that SDR looks better than HDR. And I am going to be using SDR most of the time now, moving forward, because I love to use black film insertion, All in Motion Pro. So I could be biased and tell you no, SDR is the way to go because black film insertion is the best. Motion clarity is much better than any HDR, so SDR is the way to go. No, HDR looks better. And I would like to get both. I would like to get HDR and get great motion clarity. But for that we need a lot of hertz. So we need a TV that's at least 480 hertz or at least 240 hertz HDR. I would not use black film insertion, enjoy the HDR, but we don't have that yet. We don't have 4K 240 OLEDs. We will have that soon. We need display string compression because HDMI 2.1 bandwidth is not going to allow for 240 hertz 4K, but we can definitely get it. I was surprised to not see that this year. So yeah, that answers all the questions. If you still have a question, let me know.